Hello, I'm here for a retrospective, and I'm going to give you a look at the last console war. Now, a lot of people would say PS2, Xbox, Dreamcast was a console war. Some people would say that the PS3, Wii, Xbox 360, PS4, Xbox One, Wii U. I say no, the last real console war that was actually there. It started in went from 94 till I think about 2000 when the Dreamcast was released and the PS2 was released, and that was the war between Sega, Sony, Nintendo. So at the time I was about 10 or 11 years old, and I remember watching all these commercials, seeing these consoles come out, and I remember people talking about it. Now, you have the Sega Saturn, which dropped out of nowhere. It was released, the retailers weren't really told it was being released, but on the Sega Saturn, you really had games like Virtual Fighter, you had the Panzer Dragoon Saga, you had Gunstar Heroes, you had a lot of RPGs on that system, which really was revolutionary. And the Sega Saturn doesn't get enough love. But you have PlayStation. PlayStation was a company that was known for selling stereos, headphones, Walkmans, CD players, cassette players, VCRs, TVs, all that. They jumped into the video game sphere and released games like Resident Evil, which changed the landscape. Games like Final Fantasy VII, the Final Fantasy series. They had RPGs. They had Crash Bandicoot, which was a really, really good platformer, and they were really doing it. But N64 released as well. Now, each system really tried. You had Crash Bandicoot commercials, you had all the Nintendo commercials, and Nintendo ended up releasing Mario 64, which was at the time, was a very revolutionary game, as was Ocarina of Time. You had Pilot Wings on there, you had Star Fox 64, you had Turok. They released a Doom game. Now what happened at the time was everybody was jockeying for position. I remember reading video game magazines, and you'd have a section for PlayStation, a section for the Sega Saturn, a section for the N64. You would see commercials, you would see advertisements. You could be watching TV shows, and they would just pop up here, pop up there. I remember going to the mall, and in Sears they actually had an N64 set up before the N64 was released, to kind of show people this is what's coming, and it was Mario 64, which I tried out. And even back then, I didn't like the controller. The controller was always weird to me. But one of the weirdest things, as I remember, is it started my disconnect with N64. I remember this is a retrospective for me, not anybody else, because at the time I was getting more and more into games. So I ended up playing Final Fantasy VII, and it changed my opinion on things. I've drifted from platformers and shooting games to RPGs, whether it be a Chrono Cross or Final Fantasy or the Tales series. I have more fond memories of playing the PlayStation than the N64. Now the N64 has my all-time favorite Star Wars game, with Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, which is a game set in between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and is a really great game. Now, I also remember Sega Saturn, because a friend of mine had a Sega Saturn, so I would go and play it. I would play the Sega Saturn. I had a PlayStation, and I played the shit out of that game. Evil Dead, Hail to the King I played a lot of, 1, Apocalypse, Colony Wars. I had every wrestling game under the sun. And even when I got an N64 later, I didn't really... My dad got me an N64 for my 15th birthday. And this would be about 2001. So in 2001, I finally got an N64, but that's when the PS2 was out. The original Xbox wasn't out yet. And I believe the Dreamcast was out too. So I've always been like one system behind, but now I'm like current gen I'm on. But I remember the PlayStation was the first console to have dual analog sticks. But I also remember seeing commercials for Resident Evil when I was like 10 years old, and that just looked awesome. As a horror fan, I thought that was really cool. But during this time, I realized that Nintendo was going from really the base of my existence to it was dropping, because a lot of the games that were on the N64 were like Rystar, like Battle Corps, a lot of kiddie looking games, I would say. The N64 was all about, like, it was catering towards kids, and I was at that age where I wanted something better. And that's where the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn came in. And I really turned into a Sony guy. And kind of left Nintendo by the wayside. And the sad thing is, the N64 is the last Nintendo system I actually was excited for. It was the last time, because I was reading GamePro back then, and Electronic Gaming Monthly. Electronic Gaming Monthly isn't even in publication anymore. A lot of people don't even read video game magazines anymore because you have YouTube. But I was reading the magazines. I was getting excited for, at that time it was called the Ultra 64, and it really, for the base part of it, I was excited. PlayStation hit out of nowhere, and especially like Twisted Metal, Crash Bandicoot, some of the fighting games on there, the Star Wars games. I could say that I've spent more money on PS1 games than N64 or Sega Saturn games, because Sega Saturn was very hard to come by back then, and it just was completely different landscape. But it's just, from a retrospective looking back, it's kind of where Nintendo lost a whole generation of people, at least where I grew up. Because when the N64 came out, yeah, there was Super Smash Brothers, there was Mario Party, there was Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, but you had so much kids games that it's like all the fans that grew up with Nintendo, we said no more. We gave up on Nintendo, and we moved on to other gaming consoles, other games. Because if you look at the N64's library for more adult-themed games, the only games that would satisfy that would be Doom 64, you have Duke Nukem 64, Star Wars, Turok Dinosaur Hunter, Turok Dinosaur Hunter 2, the wrestling games on there, Resident Evil 2, Mortal Kombat Mythologies, And off the top of my head, I really can't think of like other games that really. You had Castlevania on there, but it's considered one of the worst Castlevania games that's ever been made. So it's just looking back. When I look back on it, I look at N64 had so much hype coming into it that when it hit, a lot of people were just disappointed. I was disappointed. But I do respect the fact that like games like Mario 64 completely changed the landscape of what we call a traditional platformer. So this has just been my retrospective look, taking a look at the Sega Saturn, the N64, and the PlayStation, and the console war that was going on at the time, and I will see you later.